Chapter 16. We Don't Have Nuts. Louis Reyes lay on the top bunk of the 10 by 15 cell staring at the ceiling. His closely cropped salt and pepper hair exactly matched his thin mustache, resting over his equally thin lips. At 5'8", the thickly built man in his mid-40s fit comfortably on the jail-issue mattress. Reyes couldn't have been more relaxed if he'd have been kicked back on a beach in Mazatlan. His mood didn't stem from his familiarity with prison life. He was chilled because he knew he wouldn't be here long. Luis Martinez Reyes was the head of the Mexican Mafia. A race riot gang war at San Quentin had forced authorities there to transfer him, but something got screwed up. Reyes should have been at Pelican Bay, Northern California's Supermax. No way Reyes belonged in a low-security facility like Camp Brown. He was here because of a digital mix-up. He knew the mistake would be rectified sooner than later, but he didn't care. He was doing life. This escapade was merely a distraction from the mundane, ordinary. Danny Ortiz, who now went by the name Angel Salido, had no idea who the guy sharing his cell was. He was just glad that he'd made it here himself. The 3 weeks he'd spent in Ann Arbor County Jail had been one long sphincter squeeze. There hadn't been a minute he didn't wonder when the keepers would show up and drag him out of the cell. He worried even though they couldn't possibly know who he was. Because the agents who'd arrested him thought he was an illegal, they figured the reason they didn't get a hit on his prints was because he'd never been printed in the States before. That wasn't it. The morning he'd heard his alias announced on the intercom, he hadn't known what to expect. Was this the day they found him out? He was relieved when he saw the transport bus. He didn't know where he was going, but at least he wasn't going to die. Not today. Not here, anyway. Nurturing something that felt modestly like hope, he shuffled obligingly onto the bus. Slinking into a window seat, he stared blankly out the grimy, reinforced glass into the uncertain future. All during the numbing ride, he thought he'd been headed to the border. He was surprised and depressed when 4 days after leaving Michigan, he rolled up to the gates of Camp Brown. But no matter what, he still needed to get back into the U.S. from wherever he might land in Mexico. What if they keep me locked up there, too? He forced the thought from his mind. Reyes sat on the upper bunk with his feet crossed underneath and his back propped against the wall. Reyes' eyes flitted between the tissue-thin papers of the King James and Danny's movements. Reyes hadn't been in a general population situation in years, and experience had made him unnaturally suspicious. Reyes had spent decades observing people and their motives. Watching Danny's forlorn expression as he pressed his face against the glass told him Danny wasn't a threat. Just another guy down on his luck. Ordinarily, Reyes would have kept to himself, but for reasons only he knew, he spoke to Danny. "Where you from?" The question made Danny leery. "I don't bang. Is not what I meant." Reyes allowed a smile to validate his sincerity. Danny wasn't in the mood to talk, but figured no sense in being an asshole. "Austin, by way of Long Beach. You?" Reyes' smile broadened. "Hey, we are neighbors." He jerked both thumbs toward his chest. "Hawaiian Gardens." As Reyes laid the Bible aside and swung his feet over the side of the bunk, Danny caught a glimpse of a black hand among the many tattoos under Reyes' shirt. "Where they pick you up at?" "It's a long story. Look around. I think we have time." After he told Reyes about the attempt to rescue blacks in Michigan and the shootout that followed, Reyes revealed his true identity. Why you want to help blacks was the only thing Reyes wanted to know. At the time, it wasn't about being black. It was about people being in trouble. Who has more trouble than Mexicans? That's the thing. You know the saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Reyes knew little of world politics, and Danny knew even less about jailhouse protocol. But intake orientation at Camp Brown was a 3-week process, and both men were quick studies. On the very last day of orientation, guards arrived at the cell before 7. While being cuffed up, Reyes let Danny know that he'd get the word out concerning their conversations. Danny figured Reyes would go directly into segregation when he got to wherever he was going. He didn't figure to hear from him for a while, if ever. But barely a week had gone by before Hawk noticed the Hispanics had completely shut down their normal activities. There were no card or domino games on the yard. Nobody was bawling. Instead, Organized calisthenics, close-order drills, and self-administered martial arts exercises were taking place. None of this was happening among the black inmates. Some of the guys were suspiciously watching the Hispanics, but mostly they were bawling, joking, slapping dominoes, and going on about their regular routines. Hawk asked the young guard about the change in dynamics. Spencer Wilson, a wiry 28-year-old with a coarse complexion and a pronounced overbite, shrugged his bony shoulders and seemed as perplexed as Hawk.
Beats me, sir. Never seen nothing like this before. Marching Mexicans. That's different.
Get with the deputy warden. I want answers by morning. The next morning, Wilson stood by with the prisoner in tow. Hawk leaned back in his chair and examined Danny. This our guy?
I don't know, sir. Says his name is Angel Salido. Other than this arrest, he's not in the system.
Wilson handed Hawk a report and then added,
He doesn't speak English.
Hawk's nod indicated Wilton's dismissal, and he turned to the prisoner. Sit down. When Danny continued to stand, Hawk pointed to a chair. Miss Dela Cruz, I'm going to need you to translate. Studying the subdued figure in front of him, Hawk mulled the possibilities. Somebody had convinced the hardest Mexican gangsters in the system to submit to unprecedented discipline. Was this that guy? He directed Dela Cruz in a series of questions. Ask him where he's from.
¿De dónde eres?
How long he's been in the country.
¿Cuánto tiempo ha vivido en los Estados Unidos?
Where he's worked. How long.
¿Dónde has trabajado?
What he knows about the drills.
¿Qué sabes de los ejercicios militares?
Why his name comes up in this investigation.
Látese la camisa.
Is he related to anybody in the institution?
¿Cuál es su conexión con Reyes?
Danny gave generic answers in Spanish. Nothing he said or was evident in his demeanor suggested he had any connection with gang maneuvers. Clapping the pages of the report, Hawk turned to Dela Cruz. It says here all Hispanics, no matter the country of origin, must adhere to regimental orders. It says a new inmate named Angel is the source of that edict. Ask him the meaning of the regimental orders. Danny stared absently at the floor and merely shrugged at Dela Cruz's translation. Have him take off his shirt. Danny methodically removed his shirt, revealing unmarked skin. There was nothing to identify him as any kind of gang member, much less a shot caller. Hawk got up, came around to the front of the desk, and sat on its corner. The Marines had trained him how to conduct himself when he personally was under interrogation, but he wasn't skilled in extracting information. Ask him again about his connection to Reyes. Danny continued to downplay the relationship in Spanish. Nothing, I don't really know him. He was my cellmate before he was transferred. That's it. He didn't talk much. Regardless of the absence of physical evidence, something about Danny's demeanor didn't reflect the man he was presenting. He kept his head down, but although he appeared docile enough, Hawk sensed an intangible fortitude in his nature. As Hawk reassessed his charge, he let his gaze drift from the top of Danny's head to the tips of his toes. After a moment, Hawk stood up. I think we're done here. You can go, Miss Dela Cruz. Startled by her sudden dismissal, Dela Cruz hesitated. Hawk looked toward the door, indicating she should leave. As she walked by, he shook the report in the air and declared, The incompetence of this bullshit is staggering. He called out to Dela Cruz. Get Wilson to take this guy back to his cell. Whoever our guy is, this ain't him. Flopping back in his seat, he spun the chair around, turning its back to Danny. After a moment, he violently backhanded the report, scattering the sheets of paper across the floor. Ridiculous! I'm looking for a Mexican named Angel in the California penal system. How many can there be? Spinning back around, he yelled out the door. Dela Cruz, check on the author of this report. I want to know everything about whoever wrote this shit. Find out their credentials and whoever assigned them to this department. But first, give me something to eat. I'm starving. Coffee, too. He turned to Danny. You want a burger? Yeah was in the air before Danny realized he'd spoken. It was the first time he'd spoken English in weeks. Hawk yelled to Dela Cruz. Hold off on that Wilson call. Turning to Danny, he asked, You want to tell me what's going on? Instead of answering, Danny wanted to know what gave him away. Hawk pointed to Danny's hands. Danny looked down at his smooth, unblemished hands and understood. What's your name? Again, Danny answered with a question. Why do you help them? What? White people. Just tell me who you are and what you're up to. My name is Danny Ortiz. What's going on, Danny? Really? Really? Okay, since you need to know anyway.
Danny threw up deadpan jazz hands. Surprise, we're fighting back. We're not like you. We're not going passively to the fields or the ovens either. What like me? Hawk leaned forward. I don't know what you're trying to accomplish, inmate, but you don't get to tell me what you will or will not do. And understand something. The only one deciding what's happening around here is me. Danny's deferential demeanor dissolved into frank speak. With all due respect, sir, you don't decide anything. You can't decide because you're not the head. You're merely the finger that pulls the trigger. Be careful. Danny ignored the warning. I was like you once. I used to believe in liberty and justice for all, too. It just ain't true. The ease of Danny's transformation puzzled Hawk. Was this inmate being purposely insubordinate or just inappropriately sincere? Doesn't matter. When it comes to what happens to you personally, and I mean every breath you take, I'm head nigga in charge. You best not to forget that. No, sir. I won't, sir. Danny resumed a softer posture. Looking around the office, he focused on Hawk's portrait hanging on the wall. Clothed in dress blues, Hawk bore a confident smile, proudly displaying his chest candy. Shifting his focus to a gold-fringed American flag tucked in the corner, Danny said, I meant no disrespect, but can I ask you something? Hawk allowed his silence to be taken as consent. First, you were a soldier. Now you're the country's top prison boss. Basically, you spent your whole professional life up to your neck, helping to perpetuate a system that stands firmly on that self-same neck. I look around this room and I ask myself, who's really the prisoner here? My question is, what's the thing, the one thing, about all this shit that fucks with you the most? Sir. Hawk's face tingled, but he kept it poker and let Danny talk. The thing that bothers me most is the look in our women's eyes. The look that says she knows we can't protect her. That at the end of the day, the system, and by system I mean white men, can do anything they want to her, and there's nothing, not a goddamn thing we can do about it. Dennis flashed across Hawk's mind. And even though she knows the consequences for men of color who stand up to the system, whether she admits it or not, the fact that we haven't chosen to die in deference to our manhood impedes her ability to fully respect us. Deep down, Hawk agreed with Danny, but wasn't in a position to say so. He was uncomfortable and about to change the subject when Danny asked, You ever hear of something called phantom sensation? It's like when amputees claim they can still feel their missing limbs. Danny leaned forward, leisurely placing his forearms on his knees. That's what's up with us whenever we think we feel our nuts. Because we don't really have nuts. And if you think that by merely kissing their ass they're ever going to accept you as their legal equal, you're just flat out delusional. You need your own country for that. Later, after he had Danny taken to the hole, Hawk sat at his desk drinking Jack Daniels from the bottle until he passed out.